Do you think you are rich? It depends on how efficient we are. How well does the electrical outlet I recently had repaired by a handyman work? Is the internet service from my ISP fast? Did the delivery guy get my pizza here in the 10 minutes he promised? All of these details add up to a big picture, the sum total of the useful work we produce. That total is GDP, or gross domestic product. To finally understand what it is, let me ask you a simple question. When you cook a meal or clean your house, do you increase GDP? No, because no one is paying you for that work. And if a person marries a housekeeper who used to get paid for that work, the GDP will decrease because she is now doing the same work for free. The higher the GDP of a country, the greater its economic power. Here's a map of the global distribution of GDP. The US, Europe, and Japan are at the top, producing the most expensive goods and services. Their economies are colossal. Africa's economy looks tiny, but why don't I, for example, feel richer than the average Frenchman? You may have heard of the invisible hand of the market. Today, this expression has been replaced by the market will decide. But when you give the market complete freedom, money tends to flow from the poor to the rich. If a person has been saving $10,000 a day since the pyramids were built in Egypt, he or she would have accumulated only 20% of the wealth of the 5 richest people in the world today. Why is that? Because large-scale economies always work in favor of those who already have wealth. Capitalism, it is often said, is a soulless machine. And that's why it's become so fashionable to fight it. People want equality. Politicians come out with slogans like tax the rich. TV shows like The Squid Game have become popular because they reflect a harsh reality. For some people, debt and poverty are worse than death. But today, we're not going to fight capitalism. We're going to take it apart and see how it works. Because if you can't win, lead. Where does an economy start? With money? Not necessarily. An economy can exist without money, but money cannot exist without an economy. For example, if you go into the woods and pick berries, that's not an economy. But if you bring the berries home for your family to make a pie, that's an economy. Here, the berry becomes a limited resource, and you give it to the person who can use it best. In ancient times, people did not use money, but exchanged goods for goods. But as anthropologists say, within small communities, there was barter in the form of debt. People lent each other goods or services. Debt thus predates money. On the clay tablets of ancient civilizations, there are records like, "You owe me this much grain." But what if you need to trade with other villages? Debt is not an option here. You need to barter here and now. But barter has a problem. What if one party's goods are not needed by the other? The solution is to find a universal resource, such as cocoa beans or pressed tea. But such goods spoiled quickly and were not in demand everywhere. Then humanity turned to gold and silver, durable and equally valuable in different places. As trade developed, coins and later banknotes appeared. Each banknote guaranteed that it could be exchanged for a certain amount of gold. But in 1971, starting with the United States, countries began to abandon the gold standard. Modern money became fiat money. Its value is based on public confidence, not on material security. Money became the engine of the economy. Those who accumulated it began to ask themselves what to do with it next. Lying in a trunk is inefficient because capital does not grow that way. So people came up with loans. Those who had money but no ideas lent to those who had ideas but no money. This created the need for an arbiter to decide who could be trusted with money. Banks became that arbiter. The word bank comes from the Italian banco, which means bench. Venetian merchants used such benches to exchange currency. Today, banks connect people to money and people to ideas, redistributing resources and supporting economic development. The interest rate is the bank's most important tool. For example, banks accept deposits at 5% per annum and lend at 15%. The difference between these percentages is their income. However, it is important to realize that banks do not lend lightly. They evaluate the creditworthiness of their customers using a rating. Your credit score depends on your financial discipline. For example, if you have taken out a loan and paid it back on time, your rating will increase. It turns out that banks make money on the difference between deposit and loan rates. This is legitimate, even if it sometimes seems to benefit only the banks. However, banks play an important role in the economy. They finance ideas that can generate income. For example, a loan for a tractor that helps you earn money is much more useful than a loan for a new TV. But where do banks keep their money? With themselves? Partly. Banks keep a small portion of the money in reserve and put the rest into circulation by making loans. This creates a money multiplier effect. For example, you deposit $1 million in the bank. Of that, 100,000 stays in the bank and 900,000 is loaned out. This money goes back into the bank where some of it stays in reserve and the rest is loaned out again. In this way, your initial million can create up to $10 million in the economy. This works as long as most depositors don't withdraw their money at the same time. If a mass withdrawal of deposits begins, the bank could face liquidity problems. This is why we have deposit insurance. This system is based on trust. If customers are sure that the bank is reliable, it will continue to operate. But if panic sets in, even a stable bank can fail. Banks also try to build customer confidence. For example, they offer interest on card balances or cash back on purchases. This gives customers a sense that their money is working, even in regular accounts. We found that banks take money from some people in the form of deposits, lend it to others in the form of loans, and share some of the profits through cash back and interest on balances. The economy is moving forward, but money is still tight. Why is that? The question then becomes, why not just print more money? Actually, you can. For example, the US printed $9 trillion. That's a quarter of all existing dollars created in a single year. Why have they only printed $9 trillion? Why not create more? The answer is simple. Money loses value when there is too much of it. This is called inflation. The more money people have, the greater the demand for goods. Manufacturers see this and raise prices. As a result, each banknote becomes less valuable. In this way, the new money supply reduces purchasing power. For example, in the US, after printing $9 trillion, inflation rose by 5%. This means that $1 buys 5% fewer goods. Now to you. Why does your paycheck seem to go up, but your standard of living stays the same? It's because of inflation. As prices go up, your real wage stays the same or even goes down. Let's say that inflation is now averaging 7%. This means that in order to simply not lose money, your salary must increase by 7% every year. If you make $100,000, next year it should be $107,000. 2 years from now, it should be $114,000. And 5 years from now, it should be $140,000. Then there is hidden inflation, shrinkflation. In this case, prices stay the same, but the quantity of goods decreases. For example, a carton of milk is no longer 1 liter, but 0.95 liters. Instead of 10 eggs, 9, and in a Toblerone chocolate bar, the distance between the mountains becomes larger. There is also the opposite situation, deflation, when there is less money than goods. The prices of goods fall. At first glance, this seems like a good thing, but in practice, it causes people to stop spending money. They start waiting for prices to fall even further. For example, why buy a Toyota car now when you can buy a Lexus for the same money in a month's time? This slows down the economy, and companies start losing profits and laying off workers. That's why managing inflation and deflation is a key challenge for any economy. It's important to keep inflation under control, but you can't go into deflation either. Politicians make decisions that affect the economy, but they come and go and the economy stays. That is why in many countries, money is not printed by the government, but by an independent central bank. The central bank is like the Iron Bank in Game of Thrones. It works only with facts and figures, and even the most powerful leaders have to deal with it. Central banks print money neatly and lend it to commercial banks at a certain interest rate called the prime rate. When inflation is too high, the central bank raises the prime rate. Then the commercial banks get loans at a higher interest rate, and they raise interest rates for their customers. People and businesses borrow less, start saving money, and inflation goes down. When inflation is low, the central bank lowers the interest rate, making loans cheaper. Banks are more willing to lend to people and businesses, so they start spending more, start businesses, and the economy starts to grow. This helps maintain a balance between inflation and economic growth. The central bank has 2 main tools: the amount of money printed and the federal funds rate. They help maintain a balance between high inflation with low unemployment and low inflation with high unemployment. It's like juggling. Too much tilt in one direction can throw the whole balance off. Printing money and regulating interest rates help stimulate the economy, but there's a problem. Money is concentrated in the hands of a small group of people. How do you measure that inequality? By using the Gini coefficient. It's calculated from a graph where the horizontal line is the total population and the vertical line is total income. With perfect equality, the graph is a straight line. 10% of the population owns 10% of the income, 50% owns half, and so on. In a society with total inequality, the graph will lie on the axis and slope sharply upward. One person has all the money. In practice, most countries' graphs fall between these extremes. When someone becomes rich, it does not necessarily mean that someone has become poorer. For example, the rich invest, create jobs, and raise the standard of living. This is called a rising tide lifts all boats. But inequality also has disadvantages. Poor people often can't grow and learn, and the rich have to hire security guards and build fences to protect their property. What should be done? We need a powerful new tool to redistribute resources, taxes. This tool is in the hands of government. Ideally, the state should collect taxes from those who are doing well and channel them to those who need support. If the state wants to stimulate business growth, it can give tax breaks, remove controls, and allow entrepreneurs to earn more. On the other hand, if poverty reduction becomes a priority, it can raise income taxes, introduce luxury taxes, and use the proceeds to build schools, hospitals, or even provide direct assistance to the unemployed. This would give people time to find more decent jobs instead of accepting low-wage work. This model is called a mixed economy. The state does not tell people where and how to work, but creates the conditions for the economy to grow. The main thing is not to strangle the rich and the poor with excessive taxes. Today, taxes are seen by many as something shameful, but it is a contribution to the common good, education, healthcare, and law and order that everyone needs. But the question remains, why can't the government just give money to everyone? It is the concept of unconditional basic income, UBI, an idea that first appeared in the 16th century in Thomas More's book, Utopia. Money for all adults, whether they work or not, sick or healthy, is the idea of UBI. It's money for basic needs, so people know they won't go hungry or homeless if something happens. This income gives people the opportunity to continue their studies, do creative work, look for a better job, or even take a risk and start a business. Such experiments have already been conducted in Finland, Spain, and some other countries by private companies. The results showed that people didn't start spending money on alcohol or entertainment as many people feared. They became less worried about money, which improved their overall well-being. However, there was no significant increase in creative or entrepreneurial activity. The main challenge is financing. We already know that simply printing money is not the answer, as it causes inflation. In order not to increase the total amount of money in the economy, the money has to come from somewhere. That's why no country in the world has adopted BDB on a permanent basis. It's just too expensive. And there it is, the secret ingredient of economics. It's institutions. They can be formal, private property, independent courts, a transparent tax system, or informal, trust, culture, generosity, corruption, or the famous German Ordnung. For example, most Germans know that you can't make noise after 10 p.m., and that brown bottles should be recycled separately from clear ones, and they follow those rules. In essence, formal institutions are laws and informal institutions are traditions. But what does this have to do with economics? Doesn't wealth depend on oil, gas, and uranium? The answer is simple. Rules can completely change the nature of the game. For example, in countries with independent courts and protection of private property, people are more likely to invest and start businesses. Formal institutions such as laws help protect people. Informal institutions such as trust promote development. For example, if you want to start a business with a friend and you trust him, you can agree verbally or draw up a simple contract. This saves time and money. If there's no trust, you'll spend months and thousands of dollars on legal work. Low trust means unnecessary spending on security and cameras. The 4 Asian tigers, South Korea, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Taiwan, are a case in point. Just 100 years ago, piracy and drug trafficking flourished in Singapore. But Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew changed all that by introducing tough laws and cracking down on corruption. Singapore has stiff fines, $1,000 for a cigarette butt, the death penalty for drugs. But it is the easiest place to start a business. It takes 30 minutes and costs $1 Singapore dollar. Hong Kong, South Korea, and Taiwan have taken different paths, but the result is the same: economic growth. South Korea, for example, has used its chaebol, conglomerates like Samsung and Hyundai, to build a strong economy. But to continue to grow, it will have to fight clannishness. The most important resource in the 21st century is people. We simply need to build institutions, support people, and invest in human capital. If you like the video, don't forget to like and share it. See you in the future.